Alan rubbed the crystalline facets of his left humerus. Fine, gray powder fell from the joint, coating the floor of the museum piece in a dull, gritty film. Beneath the pressurized cabin lights, a life form of living glass should not have been crumbling into silt. It was a physical admission of structural failure that V.A. Allen, the junior tactical analyst, found deeply unsettling. Against the hull, the rhythmic thrum of the engine felt less like a machine and more like a heartbeat under stress. The Scourge swarm was currently dismantling the Omicron settlements, stripping the energy from fusion cores and leaving frozen, silent husks in their wake. Into this nightmare, 3 cadets had brought a vessel that belonged in a history exhibit, fueled by chemical propellants that most of the galaxy had forgotten 5 centuries ago. The Scourge doesn't understand the physics of a museum. You'll want to see exactly how Nova Trent defines a proportional response. Stay close. Through the observation port, the void looked hungry. To stop a biological superweapon that eats plasma and fusion bonds. Nova Trent had suggested they simply bring a museum's worth of lead. V. Allen's primary refraction node, a heart-shaped crystal on his collarbone, flickered with a dim, anxious violet light. He was a creature of precision, of Silica-based logic, and nothing about a 50-year-old ship equipped with a high-tension ether cable made mathematical sense. Near the rear airlock, Nova Trent stood with a handheld caliper, measuring the slack in that same cable with the intensity of a surgeon. She moved with a slow, deliberate economy that V.A. Allen misinterpreted as a lack of urgency. Beside her sat a crate of fragmentation charge Mark 0 canisters, their iron casings cold and archaic. Every few seconds, Nova would check the tension, then mark a small notation on a crumpled piece of paper she kept in her thigh pocket. The tension is within 2 microns of the failure point, V. Allen said. His voice a series of melodic, harmonic chimes. Nova, if the Scourge tendrils latch onto the hull, this cable will snap and vent the cabin atmosphere in less than 3 seconds. Nova didn't look up from her calipers. Then we'll just have to make sure they latch onto the cable instead of the ship, V.A. Allen. A low, wet thud echoed through the floorboards. It was the sound of a Scourge tendril, a massive rhythmic, pulsing muscle the size of a transit bus slapping against the outer hull. V.A. Allen flinched, his crystalline joints grinding with the sound like sandpaper on marble. The Scourge were energy feeders, but they were also incredibly territorial predators that viewed anything in their space as a threat to be crushed. From her pocket, Nova pulled a standard issue incident report form and a heavy, ink-based pen. She began checking the date on her watch, her expression entirely neutral. Watching her, Allen felt a surge of cold, analytical dread. He was certain she was drafting a final testament of apology for their impending deaths. It was a human eccentricity to document one's own failure before the end. Your primary node is dimming, Nova said, her voice cutting through the building tension of the hull groans. Polish your joints if it makes you feel better. We aren't dead yet. The cadet gripped his shoulder, the silica facets of his fingers leaving faint scratches on his own skin. They are breaching the outer shielding. Or they would be, if we had any. Nova, they are literally touching us. Your tentacles are in my personal space, Nova muttered, more to the bulkhead than the cadet. Across the debris field drifted the last escape pod from the settlements. Its lights dark. Nova tucked the report under her arm, grabbed the tether cable, and began to slide down toward the airlock. She moved one-handed, her human muscles allowing for a grip strength that VAELN's sensors estimated at over 500 pounds of crushing force. The hunt had begun, though Vacalin still believed they were the prey. Through the vibrating deck plates, Allen felt the arrival of the swarm. 3 separate tendrils now coiled around the external tether cable, their bioluminescence flaring as they sought a pulse of energy that didn't exist. Living glass shattered inside Allen's arm. He clutched his heart-shaped refraction node, the violet light within it pulsing white, a dying star as the pressure mounted. Near the rear winch, Nova Trent stood with her feet braced against the bulkhead. Beside her, The fragmentation charge marks Hero set ready, its iron shell cold and indifferent to the biological god currently trying to crush their ship. To a Silica life form, this was the end of all logic. Nova, you are filling out of form. The Ellen chimed, the harmonics of his voice breaking into static. We are being consumed by a swarm that has unmade empires, and you are worried about the date. Nova licked the tip of her pen and circled a number on the document. She checked her watch, hummed a short melody, and tapped the paper against her knee. I am worried about the paperwork, Nova said, her hand dropping to the magnetic launch lever, rose from the hull shutter that rattled VAE lens core. The hidden layer he had observed earlier, the obsessive slack measurements on cable tension, suddenly snapped into focus with the clarity of a lens. The museum piece wasn't a ship trying to escape, it was a delivery system. By coiling around the tether, the Predator had unintentionally turned itself into the target rail of a primitive mass driver. Into the silence of the void, the cable Nova snapped taut. She didn't fire an energy beam or a fusion warhead, jagged, unrefined iron. Fragmenting explosives within the canisters were triggered by the sudden acceleration, creating over 4,000 individual shrapnel pieces moving at 2,800 feet per second. Fragmentation charges of this era were designed for atmospheric carnage, but in a vacuum, their lethality was absolute. Without air resistance to slow the shards, the iron tore through the rhythmic tissues of the swarm like a hot needle through silk. Silica life forms might fracture at 12 pounds of pressure, but the Scourge were currently experiencing the kinetic equivalent of a falling moon. Nova Tret launched a paper report into the vacuum as the fragmentation charge ignited. Nova stood up, hoisting the heavy winch lever with an ease that shouldn't have been possible for a creature of her size. Human skeletal muscle density allowed for a 6-fold body weight load bearing. A biological fact V. Allen hadn't fully appreciated until he saw her brace against the ship's recoil without flinching. The Scourge tendrils spazzed. Severed masses of muscle drifted away, their glow fading into a dull purple. The surrender V.A. Allen thought he had witnessed was actually a cold, administrative calculation. Proportional response, Nova remarked, wiping a smudge of ink from her thumb as she looked at the carnage. You threatened him. I threatened bigger. By the time the Omicron medics arrived, the sector had been cleared of biological threats. Nova sat on the edge of the airlock, carefully opening a small metal box, while the local fleet commanders argued over the structural impossibility of the victory. The humans simply focused on her sandwich. They evacuated the sector, but Nova merely evacuated her lunch den. Avani Helen stood by the braided line, his shoulder joints newly polished and gleaming. Beneath his feet, the deck was silent. The metal box on Nova's lap smelled of cold bread. Beyond the hull, the stars remained fixed in their old patterns. The steel cable continued to vibrate with the lingering hum of the launch. End of story. Lens verification tag complete.